have a quorum this morning, so we'll go ahead and jump right in. I want to thank council members O'Farrell and Buscaino for being here this morning as well, and I believe we might be expecting a couple others. With that, we're going to go ahead and run through, instead of running through the agenda, we'll go ahead and go to multiple speaker cards first for items that are under the purview of this committee, and that's going to be you got a board for multiple speaker cards? Okay. Some technical difficulties. I didn't even know it was capable of having words on it. Can we just start at every Public Safety Committee meeting to say TFANC on it? Okay.
We're okay.
All right, Herman, come on up. Armando, you're on items 13, 11, 24, 25, 15, 18, 14, 1, 17, 9, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 6, 21, 22, 10, 23, 28, 26, 27. It looks like every item in different, okay, yes. So you got 2 minutes combined on those items.
So on the Board of Commissioners, we're dealing with a gentleman by the name of Dale Bonner. And Mr. Bonner must realize that, again, that for those of us who are advocating at police commission meetings, we want you to know for the record that we allege that the meeting's transcript shows that council members have devised an official plan to intimidate against myself and other members of the public for speaking out and criticizing those under the First Amendment rights when they instigate our prosecution in retaliation for our criticism. So I want Mr. Dale Bonner to know that it shows retaliation that was and is substantial or motivating factor behind the plan of the city to prosecute Wayne Spindler and myself, Mr. Dale Bonner, along with Michael Hunt, under First Amendment values. This excessive use of strong-handed verbal abuse. Then I signed up on another fucking item, Mommy, who's not here, Miss Rodriguez, for apprehension and conviction of persons responsible for the death of multiple apprehension of people who have been killed in Los Angeles. Well, Chief Moore yesterday said at the police commission that there is no substantial evidence that people are being killed in Los Angeles. Well, unfortunately and alarming, yes, they are, and they're not being reported because we have fake news like the LA Times, right? We should have City Watch, Daniel Gus report the incidents. This way we can fucking tell the truth. So under 42 U.S.C. 1983, alleging a number of incidents that under theory of violation of the Brown Act and discrimination, fuck Mitchell Englander, the little word on his
topic,
stupid
so thank you very much.
wife.
Your time's done. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
With that, we're going to go ahead and go into, let's go ahead and turn our attention to the agenda. I've got a number of items for consent. Do we have cards on any of the items for speakers? Or are those all general public comment? Item 2? Okay, so we'll go ahead and hold on items 8, 6, and 1 for cards. And so on consent, I'd like to take items 3 and 4. Well, those aren't coming up. It's not coming up on the board. Oh. Okay, yeah, okay, now it's syncing. Okay, well, before we go to consent, we'll go back to the board. Is Mr. Clark? Forrest Clark not here? Okay, go ahead and take his name off. Rodney? Not here. David Estrada? Not here. Gary? Not here. Okay, so those are, Gary here? Yeah, Gary? Gary what? Kimberly? Yeah, okay, I'm sorry, come on up. Apologize. Often we have a speaker here who comes to every single meeting and puts a lot of fake names on the board as well, so. Okay, so Mr. Herman, you're excused from, you just disrupted this meeting. I'm not going to warn you every meeting. Sergeants, please escort him out. You're gone. Go ahead and escort him out. Goodbye. You're going to continue to disrupt the meeting while you're walking out? Then you're barred from the next meeting. Okay, sergeants, he's barred from the next Public Safety Committee meeting because he's continuing to disrupt this meeting. Sergeants, if he attempts to come back in this meeting for the next meeting that we have, do not let him in. Thank you. Goodbye. Thank you. All right. Good morning. He's here every single meeting. Mr. Bonner will get used to him, too. Yes. Good morning.
Good morning. The city recently purchased $65 million of radios for LAPD and LA City Fire in a process that was in violation with the city charter as it relates to competitive bidding. These radios have been delivered, and it has been discovered that they do not meet the required specifications for LAPD and LA Fire, and it places officers and firefighters at risk. The specification relates to the UL certification of the radio and its operation in the presence of flammable gases and vapors. The radios cannot be deployed as delivered. The Harris radios meet this specification. The Motorola radios do not. How does the committee address this issue? Simple. Stop relying solely on so-called experts from LAPD. In your oversight, seek the opinions of tertiary experts in the industry. Eliminate the city's CIOs at LAPD
Thank you.
and LAFD.
If you finish your thought, if you could.
Technology procurements by the city should be driven by ITA with appropriate, unbiased, and measured input from the user departments. Find Motorola in material breach of their contract.
Okay, thank you.
Cancel the contract.
Thank you very much. And if you have the
Begin a new competitive bidding process using ITA.
If you have the statement in writing, if you wanted to submit it, you could do that as well.
I have a package that I submitted.
Okay, we got that.
It contains additional information.
Great, thank you very much.
You have the time
So that's
to
all
do
of your time.
this.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
The question is, do you have the
So with that, colleagues, that concludes all of the items that were called for public comment. So we'll close the public comment period. Do we have any matters for general public comment? Any items? Individuals? No? So we'll go ahead and close the general public comment. I'd also like to welcome Councilmember Rodriguez here as well. Good morning. And so with that, colleagues, I'd like to call items 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. Actually, 6, no, we're good on that. 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, 11 through 19, and then 21 through 28 on consent. So the open items will be items 8, 10, 20, 1, 2, and 9.
Move the balance.
Okay, so I have a motion to move the balance on consent. With no objection, that'll be the order. So moved. Thank you very much. And if there are any reports to adopt, modifications, we'll go ahead and adopt those CA reports that are attached to those items if need be. That'll be the action without objection. Thank you very much, colleagues. With that, we'll go ahead and turn our attention to item 1. If we can go ahead and read that into the record, Madam Clerk.
Item 1 is a communication from the mayor relative to the appointment of Mr. Dale Bonner to the Board of Police Commissioners for the term ending June 30th, 2020.
And if you want to come on up, Mr. Bonner. I'm going to ask you if you could just go ahead and open up. First of all, thank you for being here this morning. And with that, thank you for your civic and public service to agreeing to step up to what I consider one of the most important appointments that we make here for confirmation by the mayor for the police commission. And so with that, if you can go ahead and just tell us a little bit about yourself and why on earth you'd want to do this.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you very much to the chair and members of the committee for the opportunity to be here this morning. And, you know, I moved to Los Angeles first in 1984, and as a young, college student, even at that time, I think was very much aware that the relationship between a law enforcement agency and the community that it serves is not only one of the most vitally important relationships in the city, but also one of the most complex relationships there is in the city as well. And some years after that, I had the opportunity to actually get a little closer to some of the law enforcement issues that were facing the city and the department. That was in the wake of the Rodney King beating and the formation of the Christopher Commission. And not only did I learn a lot about some of the thinking of the officers in the department at that time, but also a lot about how the community viewed the department and related to many of the officers, and everybody had their own unique experiences that were important to get on the record. It just happened that some years later, I've had the opportunity to serve in a number of capacities in the state government, and some years later was appointed to a cabinet position that had oversight of the California Highway Patrol and another large law enforcement agency. And at that time, I was not only faced with a change in leadership at the department, there was a number of internal issues that were important facing many of the officers in the patrol, but also the same external issues that I saw facing the LAPD in terms of how the public relates to the department. So I was committed at that time to forging a relationship between the LAPD and the CHP, and on a pilot basis in some communities here in Los Angeles and in the city of Oakland, and learned a great deal at that time, not only about the continuing issues, but how much the departments need to change with the communities that they serve. And there's been a lot of changes here in Los Angeles. So over the years, I've seen many of the issues from different contexts, and when I returned back here to Los Angeles and had an opportunity to sit down with the mayor on a couple of occasions, and this was something that we had discussed a couple of times, and most recently he was able to convince me that it was not only a need that the city had, but also an opportunity for me to participate and bring my experience to bear.
If I can just ask folks in the back if you can take your conversations outside, because it's a bit of an echo chamber, and so I'd like to direct that to Mr. Eck in the back to take his conversation. Mr. Conejo outside. Oh, he's here. Okay, you're not talking. You were just, it's guilty by association, Mr. Cornejo. All right. CD12 resident. All right. Yes. Sorry about that. Thank you.
Just finishing the point, you had asked why was I interested in taking on this responsibility, and I was explaining that in talking with the mayor and understanding not only how much has changed and evolved at the department, but also in the city. I see it as an excellent opportunity to not only continue my personal tradition of public service, but also to bring to bear many of the talents that I've honed over the years and the experiences that I've had over the years to see what we can do to build on a number of successes that have been occurring at the department and taking on many of the challenges that no doubt lie ahead.
And I ask again, why on earth do you want? No. So I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues. Any comments, questions, concerns?
Yeah.
Joe?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Bonner, for stepping up and taking on this leadership position, and I'm assuming you'll have unanimous support moving forward. As the chairman indicated, public safety is our core mission as a city. If people don't feel safe, they're not going to want to live here, work here, invest, and raise their family in our city. And based on, my review of your bio, you have the skill set, the knowledge, and the ability to serve on this commission. As other commissions have come before this committee, I would just encourage you, and I'm sure you've done this in your days serving as a secretary for the state and overseeing the California Highway Patrol, is to be on the ground with the officers and the civilian workforces. Encourage you to get in those roll calls, get in the black and whites, and continue to build upon those relationships, to hear firsthand some of the challenges and successes that we're seeing in our police stations from Silmar to San Pedro. And in addition, to continue to embrace a community-based policing philosophy and the basic tenets of community-based policing. So just a comment, and look forward to serving alongside you and in ensuring that we remain the best police agency in the country.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Good advice. Mr. O'Farrell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Bonner, for stepping up and volunteering to do this. You clearly have an understanding of the complexities of both the history and the culture and the communities and the police and the relationships, et cetera. What do you see as the biggest challenge facing you? It doesn't have to be a blockbuster challenge. It could be nuanced. But in terms of your work on the commission, as it relates to some of the top shelf issues that are being dealt with in the present day.
I see a lot of, I referred in my comments a lot to the relationship between the department and the community, and I see, and under that broad topic are lots of issues. I think one broad issue is the honing the ability to continue to adapt and improve. So I've read some of the recent reports about a number of improvements that have been made over the years. But at the same time, you've had a change in leadership, not only at the department command, but also on the board and others. So there continues to be that challenge to make sure that progress can continue. I would also say that I mentioned the importance of, in my opinion, of the department continuing to evolve with the community as well, because one thing that I see is today is a much different time period than 1984 was, and that was a much different time than the 90s. And, the broad topics that we were focused on in the 90s and in the era of three strikes and building more institutions, those are still important issues today, but many of the other dynamics in the real world have also come to bear. So in a place like Los Angeles, where you have the continuing issues around homelessness and the unique challenges presented by that growing problem facing every corner of the city, and there's a number of issues embedded in that as how you relate to that community and people with different forms of mental health challenges and the like. So I see all of that still under the broad topic of the relationship of trust that the department needs to continue to build and sustain with the community. I would lastly say that it works both ways, that what we want not only is transparency and accountability, but a sense of fairness, not only that the community is being treated fairly, but that the officers are being treated fairly in the work that they do. So to be a little more specific, I expect early on to be giving a fair amount of attention not only to the issue of the community policing around homelessness, but also to recruiting and retention. I'm going to assume that, I haven't had this briefing yet, but I'm going to assume that the department's like most public agencies, it's facing significant attrition, and there will be a significant turnover in the mid and senior ranks of the department, and I think it's important to focus on the recruiting efforts to bring in officers who will be as diverse and talented as we need them to be. So that's where I expect to start. And lastly, we're in the technology era, so we've got the new body cam policy, and I expect to be paying close attention to how that policy is evolving as well.
Thank you. And interestingly enough, I was at Chief Scott's ceremony just last week, and she mentioned, as an African-American police officer, female, that within 3 to 4 years, about 60 to 70% of those female recruits that came along around the same time during the consent decree are going to retire, and there's really no plan of action to hire and train more minority women officers, and I think that's going to be a real opportunity of focus for everyone involved. But that really stood out with me because that's really what helped pave the way for her success. So that's something to think about as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rue. Did you have anything? Thank you for that conversation. I couldn't agree more. And I think you definitely hit the nail on the head. Those are some of the biggest challenges we face, and particularly outside within the communities and the department internally. We had a deep discussion already, so I don't have to revisit a lot of that. But I do want to say that in springing off of the comment that was made earlier by Mr. Buscaino, that this is one of the cornerstone essential functions of the city. I couldn't agree more. In fact, I would double down on that and say the most important function we have as a local government, is public safety, police and fire, and everything that envelopes that. To make sure that not only the public feels safe in their home and in their business and on the street, but they also feel safe with a police officer. And that's a whole nother element. And they have safe, responsible leaders within the agency and the department. And it's a very unique position that you are about to undertake, in that we are the leading edge agency, the best police department by far in the country, that every other agency, whether it's the way we're set up, the way we train, the community relations and policy programs that we put in place, the technology, but most importantly, the civilian oversight concept that we have within this department wants to emulate and replicate. The sheriff's department has been struggling for years in putting that together and are now just getting it off the ground. We're always the first, and we're also the biggest. And so with that, you are now filling a role of what is the most important element within the department and within the city, of overseeing the most important function that we do as a government. And that's a huge responsibility. It's also one that people love to throw stones at and darts. They will come after you personally, and sometimes, although probably not most of the time, for good reason, because you'll never please everyone. And the one thing that I ask, and we had this conversation in detail yesterday, or I'll just say this, is be true to yourself. Take this responsibility as one of the most important oaths that you'll take. And one of those means also being and staying independent to who you are. You're going to get a lot of input from a lot of key decision makers and stakeholders. Listen to it all, but filter it. And go with what and who you are. Because I believe you, from what I've seen, what I've read, who I've met, we're about to bring in to this commission, to this board, to this oversight body, somebody with an incredible ethical, strong foundation and moral compass that I couldn't be more proud of. So with that, colleagues, I'd ask for a unanimous vote, and you are, without objection, approved from this body, and we'll see you before the entire City Council.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Congratulations, I think.
You.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for serving.
Thank you. All right. With that, colleagues, let's go ahead and I see another council member here, so we'll, out of order, we'll go ahead in respect to Mr. Koretz. We'll make him wait and take his item last and treat him no different than he would treat any of us. we'll go ahead and take his item number 2. Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members. I appreciate you taking me early, especially since I have to do a ribbon cutting in 5 minutes, so perfect timing. I have a lot of concerns that I'm sure you're aware about the permitting of electric scooters in our city. I think our health and well-being, obviously, and our residents should be our top priority. I understand the possible values as an alternative mode of transportation and a first mile, last mile to transit, but I think we really should only be doing this if we can do it safely, and I certainly question at this point whether it's even possible. The truth is we aren't there yet, and I think we'd be negligent to ignore the dangers posed by these scooters before we really put together a cogent policy that we can be confident will work. In fact, I think the city would be pretty irresponsible to ignore the dangers that are playing out in front of us, and particularly the illegality of it. Currently, it's against the state law to ride on a sidewalk. It's against the state law to not wear a helmet, and it's against state law to ride on a commercial corridor that is marked for 25 miles an hour or more. And I look forward to hearing how we can play a role in creating a safer environment. But here's the catch-22, which makes it almost impossible. The business model of the current scooters is that people ride without helmets almost invariably, and they ride on sidewalks or they ride on commercial streets. And all those are illegal and unsafe. So if we shut down all of the riders that were violating any of those laws, 99% of the ridership was gone and the scooter companies are out of business. If we create regulations where we say we're going to stop people from riding without helmets and on sidewalks and on commercial streets, then we either put them out of business or we say we've done all of this, wink, wink, but we really can't enforce it. So the question is there any appropriate way that we can do this? And I don't see what that would be. We either enforce it, which makes it almost impossible for them to function, or we say we're going to enforce it and we don't really do it, which doesn't protect public safety. So my motion is at least a pause button. No one's saying there will always be a total ban on these forever, but we have to figure out this catch-22. We have to figure out if we can make these safe and legal somehow, and I would say we absolutely have to call a halt to their usage until then. So it doesn't have to be forever. It only has to be forever if we can't figure out a way to do these legally and safely. And I'm not sure whether that'll play out or not. I am sure that doing it illegally and unsafely, with pedestrians having to dive out of the way on sidewalks and people riding 2 or 3 to a scooter, 8-year-olds riding scooters, and all the other problems that we're all aware of, I think is a true disaster waiting to happen and already happening. And so I ask for your aye vote to move this forward.
All right. Okay. Thank you very much. Colleagues, do you have any questions? Yeah.
I don't have a question.
Or conversation? Comments, concerns with the council member while he's still here? Compliments, maybe?
Sure.
Okay. Going once.
Mighty nice tie you're wearing.
There we go. All right. Waiting for some to come out.
See, Joe has.
Well, I'm going to bring the staff up from the departments as well. Okay.
Mr. Kurtz, there's 2 committee reports pending before council. Mr. Kurtz, do you feel that what's come out of those 2 committees have addressed some of your concerns?
It addresses a little bit of the safety element. It certainly doesn't address the legality at all, because once again it says ban them on sidewalks. If you took every scooter off every sidewalk, I don't think it would be able to function any longer as the business model that we have before us. I think these companies disappear. So it only works, again, if we say, all right, it's on the books, but we're not really going to do it.
Thank you.
There are a couple improvements. Actually, I'm not sure if the improvements even stayed in. There was one suggestion to reduce the speed to 12 miles an hour. which I think would allow for safer ridership on sidewalks, not totally safe and clearly totally illegal still. But there's some improvements to what we're seeing now.
Right. Okay.
I still wouldn't recommend it, though.
Thank you. What's the ribbon cutting you have?
IATSE Local 30.
Oh, yeah, I saw that.
And the 122 years of IATSE work.
Excellent. Say hi to Jerry for all of us. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you, Rita.
All right, colleagues, we'll go ahead and bring up the department, transportation and/or public works, city attorney, whoever's here to present or discuss. And I want to remind everybody the motion before us is specific in that it is an outright move instructing DOT to issue cease and desist letters to any electric scooter company. It's very specific. That is found operating in the city and require the companies to remove them until they receive the necessary permits to operate. And then it's a further direction and instruction to the LAPD to issue violations under the vehicle code of any applicable local ordinance to individuals riding the scooters and instruct sanitation and street services to remove and impound any vehicles found on the city and find each rental company the removal of each scooter. And so with that motion before us, good morning, gentlemen. If you could walk us through both from transportation and city attorney perspective of
just from a legal standpoint, I wanted to correct a few things that were mentioned by the council member. Under the current state law, the motorized scooters are never going to be able to be driving on the sidewalk. So unless there's a change in state law, that issue is going to be problematic in terms of...
problematic in terms of, let me just, so we can have a discussion. I don't want to interrupt, but
right.
Problematic in terms of
well,
what? Why?
Well, it's not, I don't mean, I guess I'm misstating problematic. What I mean is that we're not going to be able to ban, we're not going to allow them legally to be able to be on our sidewalks.
We're not going to disallow them either. I mean, in other words,
Well, the state law disallows.
it doesn't matter if it's illegal.
It's preempted.
If it's not enforced, it's
We'd be
irrelevant.
preempted from...
But if we're not enforcing it, if it becomes an issue of spirit of the law versus letter of the law, and you see every officer drive right by them on a scooter, then it's a moot point. And if we're not enforcing, we're choosing not to enforce, then the question to you, Mr. City Attorney, is then what happens with our liability? If our sidewalks are not made for this purpose, and every single Monday I sit in this very room shelling out and voting for millions of dollars on slip and falls on our sidewalks, and we're allowing by not enforcing the scooters to ride on the sidewalks because we're not enforcing and we're choosing not to enforce the state law, what's our liability?
Well, that's a discussion we will have with the enforcement agencies.
Why can't we have that discussion now? It's right before us now.
The city attorney's office generally, we certainly can advise you.
Well, that's why you're here, so advise us. Yeah, I'm asking for your advice.
Under the state law, we don't have necessarily a duty to always enforce. It depends on when we can.
If we're choosing not to enforce at all.
I don't know that we're choosing. I don't have.
Have we written any citations at all for these riding on sidewalks?
I'm not aware of that. I would have to ask LAPD.
Is LAPD here?
Yeah.
Come on up. How you doing?
Good morning.
Morning.
How are you, sir?
Good. How you doing?
Good, good. In regards to the specific question of enforcement, as a matter of fact, in our Pacific Division, on August 4th, there was an enforcement task force regarding the dockless scooters, where we were really trying to gain voluntary compliance from the users. So a lot of warnings were issued in that particular task force, and it resulted in the users themselves abandoning the scooters because they were then educated on the specific laws of riding on the sidewalk, unable to operate the conveyance without a helmet, and some of the other vehicle code violations that included utilizing the bicycle lanes. So once they received that information, they chose to abandon those scooters, and then we did work with the companies that came and recovered them, the owners of the particular scooters. So there has been a little bit of enforcement, and one of the things that we're doing currently right now is we've recently prepared under our new Transit Services Bureau a notice to delineate the specific California Vehicle Code sections and violations that can be cited that include headlamps at night, the rear red reflector conveyances and lights, riding too close to the requirement to ride close to the right side of the curb, brakes required, bicycle helmet requirements, as well as leaving the scooters in positions of the sidewalks that prevent space and access to pedestrians. So we prepared this notice for an educational piece, and as a matter of fact, yesterday at our operations meeting, we had I informed the direct reports of operations, which are all the bureau chiefs, in regards to the enforcement efforts and also the meeting that we were going to have today in regards to that. So we are in the process of, one, enforcing education, and also our biggest thing is we want to make sure that we have voluntary compliance through an educational piece in what they can and what they can't do when they ride these conveyances.
Great to know. No, thank you very much for answering that. How many citations have we written?
Do you know?
I don't.
I don't have.
Have we written any?
I'm not sure if we've written any particular citations, but I do know about that task force.
We've done some warnings and task forces,
Yes,
but we
exactly.
probably haven't written any citations.
Probably not.
So back to the city attorney. If we haven't written any citations, what's our liability for not enforcing that law, knowing full well that our issues are not, our sidewalks are not conducive to these? And it sounds like it was very selective in only specific parts of the city where Mr. Kretz was indicating this is a big issue in his district is as well. It doesn't sound like the task force was operational there. So go back to the city attorney. What's our liability on that?
I am not going to comment. The only thing I will say is that based on what LAPD is saying, we're just gearing up right now. This is all new to the city. This is something that has
Okay,
just recently been
I'll come back to
passed.
that. Let me ask you this. We have another question I got for you then. How many companies or how many cease and desist letters, not warnings, but actual cease and desist letters have actually been written, and to what specific companies have they been written?
I believe the department informed all of the companies.
Informed, but actual cease and desist letters to stop operating in any of the locations that they're operating?
Marcel Porras, LADOT. The department has issued one cease and desist letter, and that cease and desist letter went to the company Bird.
And what about on the dockless bicycles?
It was only to the company Bird that was sent.
Why is that?
It was a selective action at a time to address a deployment of scooters that were released in the downtown Los Angeles area.
On March 20th, 2018, the City Council passed by a 14-0 vote a moratorium that was imposed with the exception of existing pilot projects initiated either through council motion or with the council member of the district's support on dockless transportation, all dockless transportation programs, until a regulatory system that protects Los Angeles communities can be established. That was the actual verbiage that was passed by and signed by the mayor of Los Angeles, passed by the council on March 20th, 2018, on a 14-0 vote, instructing the department to do so. And now we have various pilot programs that council members are supportive of. I know Joe's got one in his district. I'm not sure. I think Mr. Rue might have one in his district.
I'm not supportive.
Okay. And so I've got one in my district that they have no support letter. We've asked for a cease and desist letter. The
So
department,
not to Lime, the other company, the other major company,
Right.
Lime didn't get a letter?
It has not gotten a letter, no.
yeah, and we've asked for one after this was signed by and passed by, instructing the department to do so by the council and signed by the mayor. And I'm just wondering why that wasn't done. And what's our liability now that we've instructed the department to do it and the department has failed to send that cease and desist letter? Is the department GM here?
No, she's not.
So if you can let me know why the department has chosen not to follow the instruction by the council and the mayor. And be as specific as you can.
Yes.
Please, thank you.
I did have a conversation, as you're aware, with Lime about.
I'm asking specifically on the instruction that was passed by the council supporting the pilot programs. There's a very specific process for these companies to obtain support either through council motion and approval of the council or the council member of the district to operate their pilot programs, which is what's going on because we don't have a regulatory framework that's going through the process. The department, I know, is spending a lot of time on the regulatory framework, but in the meantime, because of our liability without having that, the council has instructed and voted and signed by the mayor, approved to instruct, not require or request, but to actually, not request, but instruct the department to cease and desist and instruct those companies, and I'm wondering why that hasn't been done.
I think partially, I think it's an issue of capacity.
Of writing a letter?
Of actually understanding where the bikes are. And
well, we've actually, out of my office, for example, have asked the department for months for that letter to the actual company that was operating without support in my district, and that's not been done months and months ago. And I'm just wondering why. Is the department able to, under the charter, unilaterally decide what to implement after council and mayoral instruction? I'm just not sure.
I'm uncertain on that.
You're not certain on that? City Attorney, if you could weigh in on that.
Well, they're obligated to follow council instructions if council has passed instructions. However, in this case, I contacted Lime and asked them, went through the rules and regulations with them.
And asked them to do a better job of picking up the vehicles. That's
Right.
not what
And
we
to
passed as a body, though.
cooperate with CD12.
I appreciate that.
My understanding is they have been doing that.
No, they have not, and we still have issues. But I don't know why we have to go back and forth when there are several council members that feel the same way. This was a unanimous vote by the council, instructing the department to issue immediately the cease and desist letters to all the operators that don't have approval for pilot projects. And I'm still not understanding why that hasn't been done. Please explain it to me.
I think it's something I would need to take back to the general manager. I know that in terms of the...
But the city attorney just said that the department is required under the charter to follow through on the instruction of council. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering why that hasn't been followed. Do you think we put motions in and just take our time to do this for some other reason?
No, sir.
So what's the next step? This was passed by the council. We're instructing the department to do it. When can we assume that the letters will be sent to all of the operators that don't have a
Pilot.
letter and an approved pilot under the instruction of council? Can you give me a time, a date?
I will come back to you.
I would rather have it, we're here now. There's no reason to reschedule this and come back. It's already been passed by the council. Can you give me a date and time that those letters will be sent?
Mr. Chair, if I can, to help with this. So as you're aware, there are 2 committee reports on seeking rules and regs on the use of bike share, electric scooters. Those recommendations will be coming to council, I was told, next week. So the recommendations from Transportation Committee, Public Works, which we've heard last week, and I feel will address some of your concerns, as well as Mr. Koretz's concerns on the rules, regulations, the enforcement, the safety piece, and I'm hopeful, that we have a council that will give some guidance to the departments and move forward on embracing this types of multimodal.
So I can't tell you how much I appreciate that comment on that. And if I could just respond, I've read all the rules and regulations and the reports that came out of both committees. It's a preliminary framework. There are a multitude of report backs from various departments. This will be going back to the committees once those reports are fulfilled. It's long. It's a process that's long in the works to actually have a full ordinance in place to implement under the CUP process if that's the direction we're going to take. And so with that, and there's still a lot of questions back and forth on those from reading the reports, we're at a minimum, if we fast track this as quickly as possible, 6 months before we'd actually have an approved framework with ordinances, that would be the best guesstimate, and that's if we literally fast tracked it. From what I would see, we would be about 6 months away. So we still have this issue before us where we'll allow pilot programs to operate and grow for other areas or very specific areas because they are illegal to operate. And so I'm a true believer in technology and disruption and the connectivity of the first mile, last mile. What I don't believe in is companies that come in and set up shop that are illegal and then wait for us to put the regulatory framework in place to allow them to operate. And then if we are, and we crack that door open to allow some pilots and we can work out and iron out the wrinkles, great. We had the same issue with marijuana, where we had over 1,000 operating in the city of LA while we were writing the rules and regulations and building the plane as we were flying with no landing gear. And now we're at a point where we're spending tens of millions of dollars to try to clean it up and close the bad operators down. We're heading down that same path. In fact, we're here now on this issue where we can allow good, reputable operators who are more than willing to work within the framework that they've worked out with the community, with the council member of the district on those pilot programs, and the ones that don't or won't return a phone call, because they're actually big operators who won't return a phone call. Those are the ones that they're going to have to wait for us to have the regulations. So the council passed this policy, very specific, and it was very simple language to write the cease and desist letter. So I want to go back to this. We're months away from having an approved framework at best. This was approved back in March. When can we have the cease and desist letters to the ones that are not operating within what was approved by council? Letters from the council members specifically on those pilot programs and or council approval.
So I have a proposal and a request as well. I think we can do that as soon as next week. I think what we would suggest is one, to reach out to all of the companies and ask them for a voluntary removal of all the scooters and bikes that are not currently permitted in the city. I think the request and I think what the challenge has been for the department is that it is a mobility program, but enforcement doesn't actually lie within the department. We don't have the authority to issue citations for moving violations. Removal of vehicles is something that would rely on Bureau of Sanitation. These are all conversations that we've helped to convene.
But we understand they can't remove them unless we've actually issued the letter of the cease and desist.
And so what I would request is some additional direction to the enforcement departments, and they have been collaborative in working with us, but just to understand that it's not just DOT.
But the letters haven't even gone out, so let's get to that first.
And so definitely. So I think we can issue the letters.
Be issued by next week.
Yes.
And so you understand where the approved pilot programs are and where they're not.
Yes.
Okay. I'm not trying to harp on you personally on this. We've spent a lot of time, and what we're fielding, just so you know what's behind this aggravation, is a lot of phone calls and angry constituents that we're getting on our end. They're not walking into your office, they're walking into ours.
Right.
They're asking us to do something about it. Now we've told them we have, but yet we haven't, right? And so that's where this is coming, just so you understand.
Understood.
Okay. Mr. O'Farrell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I have some opinions that have formed, and I have some technical questions. I've been doing some of my own research, and Bird is dumping these scooters in major cities across the country in the hundreds and in the thousands. They have hundreds of millions of dollars of stock sales in advance of an IPO. They are leveraging Los Angeles and other cities just so that they can have a successful IPO. That's my strong opinion. And shame on us if we allow that to happen on our backs while endangering the public. We're seeing these Bird scooters and Lime scooters and maybe a few other companies everywhere. We're seeing the scooters everywhere. Never have I seen anyone wear a helmet, whether they're riding on the street or crossing a major boulevard illegally or riding on a sidewalk, sometimes two at a time. No helmets, a lot of young people, concerns me a whole lot. I think just any moment we'll have some sort of terrible tragedy on one of these scooters. So we need to get some sort of regulation in place ASAP, and I just hope that whatever framework we're discussing does not give exclusive right to those who have dumped these scooters illegally to be part of a pilot system. In fact, we should think about excluding them, if you ask me. So I think I am not opposed to the disruptive, companies, disruptive technology at all, but I am opposed to anyone who does not respect the rule of law. And we cannot have one without the other. And that's been the problem, in my view, across the board in a variety of ways, whether it's Uber and Lyft or whether, whatever it is. So we have a responsibility, I think, as city leaders to figure this out way before we allow pilot projects, in my view. I do feel that some of the reports that have been heard in committee are starting to get us there. But we have to, we as lawmakers have to be really diligent in how we, land on the provisions and policies and an ordinance that will support, collectively support. So one of the things that concerns me is these scooters being left everywhere. I mean, if I see one blocking a sidewalk or a street, it's going to end up in the trunk of my car. Because I'm going to pull over and I'm going to confiscate it myself. I don't want to see anyone's hands tied for confiscating these scooters when they're blocking a right-of-way anywhere. And I want to make sure that that's part of whatever ordinance that we land on. Without any sort of required wait period or any of that, I should be an immediate impound if one is even partially blocking any right-of-way, whether it's a street or a sidewalk or an alley, you name it. So that's important. To DOT, can you talk a little bit about geofences established in a particular area if it is a pilot project? The effectiveness of geofences, how that would play into a pilot project or a permanent ordinance or not. So that's the first question.
I was going to just respond.
Thank you.
Yeah, last month, General Manager Reynolds did actually raise the issues that you just raised regarding warning these companies that if they didn't comply with rules and regulations, they would not be receiving permits. So that has been made clear to them, and if they want to look at a good example, they can look no further than Santa Monica, where two of those companies are not going to be allowed to operate in the city.
And while an ordinance is pending there, from my understanding.
Now, in terms of enforcement now, even without us passing anything, there are state laws regulating motorized scooters that can be immediately enforced by LAPD.
But we're not enforcing any. We haven't written a single citation.
Heard from them. They just are starting now because this is new to them. This is something that
Well,
has suddenly been foisted on the city in the last couple of months, and they are learning the various laws themselves right now, and they're doing exactly what they should be.
I think that this has been going on. Actually, it's not totally new. It's been about a year. And it was 6 months ago that the council actually passed the cease and desist order. The state laws were written, if not years, decades ago. So these aren't necessarily new. The technology's new. We get that.
No, but the motorized scooter laws are new in the state code and starting in 2018. And there are a number of things. I certainly will be happy to sit down with LAPD to go through the various laws that they can currently enforce. There are a number of requirements.
So here's and I just want to break up the conversation.
More questions, Mr. Chair. And to clarify, I want to clarify one of your points too.
That might be the case, but if we keep going back to the idea that we're ordering the companies not to operate, then why are we ignoring that order from the council and the mayor and then putting it on LAPD to enforce laws that technically they shouldn't be wasting their time on if these companies aren't operating in those areas anyway? So we're making more of a workload for them, taking them away from essential duties and functions because the department or the city attorney's office hasn't followed through on what council's instruction was on the cease and desist. So, Mr. O'Farrell, if you could.
Yeah, no, as far as what I'm trying to get to, Mr. Chair, is as we move forward on an ordinance, and we invariably will because we need to, I just want to make sure there are no limits on some sort of time restriction for a confiscation. So I think I've made that point really clear. But in terms of the geofence, how is that going to be effectuated, and what's the enforcement if there's a violation of that?
So the geofence, for those who don't know, is the ability to geographically place a barrier, a digital barrier over a specific area. So let's say a specific neighborhood. And so that would, the vehicles themselves would know, and the operator would know when those vehicles enter that area. And so a couple of things can be done. And this is the policy enforcement piece. One, they could say, you cannot end a trip on that, and so the vehicle itself would not be able to end.
So it would power off if it left the...
I just don't think they wouldn't be able to end the ride. So they could ride into the geography, but they wouldn't be able to leave it, right? So, or end their trip, or they could leave it, but they would be being charged. And so there would be a disincentive to the user.
So there's a fee issue associated with leaving a geofence, but what about, does a vehicle power off? Is technology advanced to that degree?
We've heard from some operators that is possible. I just don't know if that would be ideal, because it could create a safety issue if we are, all of a sudden you cut the power while someone is riding it. And so that would be a concern. Okay. I think the other concern, because again, we do consider this a form of mobility, like a redundancy, and when we think about the most extreme situation, if someone is using one of these vehicles to get to an area because their car broke down, because it's late night service and there isn't operations, I think to penalize a user to enter into that, to end that trip, I think it's a policy call, but it could have a negative impact on.
No, I think we need to regulate the companies more than regulate the users, because they just want a quick ride somewhere and they're not too concerned with the details.
Right.
It's up to the companies to be responsible for that piece of it.
And so we have tested, and again, we understanding in terms of the cease and desist discussion, but there has been attempts to work with the companies to actually encourage them to start adopting some of these types of procedures for geofencing. I do believe there was that attempt to do that in Councilmember Englander's district adjacent to Cal State Northridge, who had a pilot that they were running. And anecdotally, we did hear from some of my staff that they were being responsive, so people would end the trip in the geofenced area, and immediately we're sending staff to go out and retrieve the vehicle and rebalance it to the home area.
The companies were sending staff out. Okay.
Yeah.
The last point I want to make is, I don't want to limit the authority of anyone to impound one of these if it's blocking. I mean, I'm hammering it down on the right of way, whether it's LAPD, sanitation, street services. I don't want to hamper any city department from confiscating one of these that's blocking a right of way in the immediate. Just so I know that the conversations will continue in terms of landing on an ordinance, and Mr. Buscaino talked about reports that are pending, et cetera. We're going to hear those. But I'm glad to have this opportunity just to express some of my opinions, some of my concerns, and some of my ideas in relation to these motor scooters. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Mr. Rue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And, nearly a year ago, we saw the emergence of dockless bikes and then scooters on our streets, and knew that if we were going to start building out our first and last mile infrastructure in our city, we're going to need to develop a workable and enforceable regulation, not just ban them. Seeing that the potential for this technology and the need for effective regulation, I introduced a motion in October of last year asking the Department of Transportation to develop these rules and regulation. This report from Department of Transportation is now moving through, as mentioned by Councilmember Buscaino, through the Transportation and the Public Works Committee, and the next step is being heard in the City Council, including a CUP process that, amongst other goals, seeks to limit liability for the city. And at this point, a ban would be operationally and legislatively counterproductive, so I'm a no vote on this item.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'm with you, Mr. Ryu. I think we have collectively, between Mr. Ryu's district and my district, have been the beneficiary of embracing multimodal transportation, and it's been a successful pilot. And let me recognize the chairman for making sure the council didn't put an end to a successful pilot. And I believe we called for a pilot in my district because I want to be known as a city that embraces and invites technology, not bans it. And I believe we have lessons learned in my district as well as Mr. Ryu's district on what has been successful and some of the challenges. And, you know, the enforcement piece has been a challenge. But for me, it's also personal responsibility. There's a state law that requires to wear a helmet under the age of 18. There's also state law that requires you to wear a seatbelt in your car. So if you're going to use a scooter, if you're going to use a scooter in our streets, wear a damn helmet and don't ride in the sidewalks. So I'm not supporting this complete ban. I would rather have the Bureau of Sanitation and Street Services focus on cleaning streets and picking up our trash, especially in a time where we have traffic issues in the city. We want to embrace multimodal transportation, get people off their cars, out of their cars, using public transportation, whether it's a bus, rail, a scooter, a bike, and to get to point A to point B. Now for me, coming from San Pedro, I've tried multimodal transportation. Okay, I rode my bike to a bus stop, rode a bus to the Red Line.
We've all seen it.
And
All on Facebook.
Yeah, I can't erase it.
2 hours and 10 minutes. 2 hours and 10 minutes.
We've seen it.
So I would look forward, and I know Mr. Bonin, the chairman of transportation, Mr. Blumenfield, chairman of public works, and we collectively, the two committees, have put in place some regulations and rules that will come to council very, very soon. And I agree, Mitch, that both Mitches, that we need an urgency clause that's attached to this because we need to have those rules in place in order to make this a successful program citywide. So, but also think we need to collectively focus on improving the infrastructure. And whether it's, making sure our bike lanes are paved, ensuring that we have dedicated bike lanes because the scooters will be allowed to use those dedicated bike lanes so they feel safe to get to point A to point B, and work alongside our law enforcement partners to enforce not riding their scooters on the sidewalk. So
Okay, so
that's where I stand.
there's a motion to oppose
Yes.
the motion before us. There's a second on that, too. So let's finish the discussion, if we could.
Well, actually, Mr. Chair,
Yes.
we need a motion to oppose, we just vote no.
No, just vote no, but I wanted, right now would be, yeah, we do, because it's asking us to support it. So we'd have to actually ask to, or we could just vote no, either way. But I could, as a chair, take the prerogative and recognize it as a motion. So I'll do that and ask that we'll vote on it as such. But before we do...
Well, I'd like to chime in,
did you
Mr.
want to-
Chair.
oh,
Yes, thank you.
Looking at you, yeah.
No, and just in line, to contribute to the conversation, and I know we've had an extensive conversation as well as in Public Works just last week on this, and I appreciate the effort that the Department of Transportation is going through right now to help address all of these issues in terms of the disposition locations of where these rides conclude and how we're going to address them in our respective districts. And I said this in committee as well. As a mother of an 18-year-old who still does not want a driver's license, we have to create an environment where right now, frankly, it's not just from the disinterest of wanting to utilize traditional modes of transportation, namely vehicles, but when we talk about
the affordability and the needs for multiple transportation uses, particularly amongst our student populations. This is a conversation that I feel is really important to addressing those that don't have the financial means to get around the city in the way that they need to, and make sure that they are effectively accessing the areas of the city that they'd like. And so I think this is just one of those considerations that we are in the process of adopting policies that will help to assure that we are addressing the concerns of the issues of constituents that we have heard from, but at the same time not regulating a system that disenfranchises those that are already disenfranchised. And I think for a community like mine in the Northeast San Fernando Valley, where we don't have the public transportation infrastructure, we are in the process of getting it. These are modes of transportation that will address the needs of communities like mine. And I think it's really important that we recognize, and thank you, Mr. Buscaino, for also, we were chatting about this, the need for personal responsibility for people's safety and how they operate. Those are some of the things that we employ upon folks, whether they're driving a car or whether they're riding a bike. This is some of the personal responsibilities that people must deploy when they're utilizing these variety of transportation options. So, yes, I'm not in support of this motion, but appreciate the conversation.
Okay. Yes.
Just lastly, I'm also going to oppose the motion, but I respect Mr. Caress's concerns very much, but I also feel that we're on our way to an ordinance. And to me, this is similar to fireworks, right? They're illegal in LA, pretty much, except for Safe and Sane. Well, they're illegal in LA, even Safe and Sane. But they're so fun to shoot off that everyone does it. And that's kind of like scooters. They're just so tempting. So we have to figure this out and without overburdening all of our resources for enforcement. And so I would strongly suggest that with this ordinance that is pending, that we do fast track it, that we have those conversations, that we don't become a tool for the birds of the world so they can have a successful IPO. It's really important. So thank you, everyone, for your comments and your work on this. And so I look forward to continuing this conversation.
Appreciate that. With all of that, colleagues, before we vote, let me just be clear about where I'm at. Since I didn't state my position, I stated my position on where I was with the rules that we've passed in council and where we're at today. And since we're all seem to be weighing in on that part of it, I love disruptive technology. I love ride sharing. I love the ideas of scooters and dockless bikes. I have utilized all of those. I don't believe that it's any one community that should or shouldn't have them. I know every one of our districts could benefit dramatically, even looking at where we want to ban them around CSUN. It's because we don't have the rules, and the operators haven't been following rules that we don't have. And they haven't been good corporate citizens and working with us or returning phone calls. They haven't been picking up the bikes and we're getting a lot of complaints, and we don't have any teeth in any of the rules because we don't have any rules. And I'm thrilled that there are certain council members that have stepped up early to be the pilots on this. I want to be the very first one to be the second operator. So, and so what I mean by that is I love piloting programs. I put in the first dedicated bike lane in the city of LA in my district. We were the first great street. We've done a lot of great things. I love the technology. What I don't like is that we crafted something very, very delicately and very carefully to make sure that we didn't impede on the very council members as well as the operators who are not only were but continue to be pilots out there. And this opened the door to those who wanted to say, hey, okay, I'll take a pilot in my district too. It doesn't close that. And so I embraced, and we all did, and that's why it was unanimous. So we wouldn't put this and the burden on LAPD, but we can define very specific areas in the city where we can craft. And the whole idea of piloting is so we can learn from it while we're going through and drafting the motions and the ordinances and the rules and the regulations. And we can't do that because we're running amok, and it's not a controlled environment in very specific areas. We're chasing our tail on areas that we didn't approve, and that's where I think where you're hearing the tone from me is that that's the whole concept. We threw it out the window for no reason. In terms of the geofencing and that specific operator in my district, it did not work. It failed miserably. They said they would do it, but they really haven't. And we're still getting the same complaints, and they're still not responsive. And they said they'd call me back, and they never did. So, yeah, that's and I didn't agree to the pilot. So, yeah, it's awful. I just want to address one little thing because I know it was brought up on the geofencing and slowing down. So I just want you to make a note of this. Much like geofencing, for those of you who've ever driven a golf cart that has a governor built in with geofencing, it doesn't come to a stop. It slows down and starts beeping and lets you know you're out of the geofence. So for any companies to say we can't do that, it would be a danger, they're full of it because they can. And we're also not talking about just having the electric vehicles, scooters or bikes, but also dockless vehicles geofenced that wouldn't slow down because they don't stop pedaling, but they could have a beeping mechanism either on the app or on the bike. So there are ways to do it. Don't take no for an answer. Make them get to yes. They can bake this into the technology. I don't support the motion before us. I am absolutely with my colleagues that have said they want to vote against it as well because I think we already have that in place, and I don't want to eliminate the pilots we have. In fact, I really do want to learn from what's working, what's not. I just wanted everybody to understand where my tone was coming from. So with that, colleagues...
Can you clarify?
Yeah.
Just call for, it's a no vote. I just call for a no vote.
It's a yes vote on Mr. Buscaino's motion to vote no on Mr. Koretz's request for a ban. And so no, we'll just make it simple and just vote no on what's before us.
So there was only one motion?
One motion before us. And it'll be unanimous from the committee without objection. It'll be a no vote. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So for clarification, you're disapproving the motion?
Correct. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Truth is truth, after all.
Truth allow. All right. Did we really say that? All right. You said that.
Yeah,
That's what they
All right. Thank you all
Giuliani.
for that vibrant discussion.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair, could LAPD just come back and state their name for the record, the
Yeah.
person who spoke?
Thank you.
I apologize for that. I was so eager to give my information. Commander Martin Baeza, Commanding Officer of Traffic Group. Thank you.
Thank you. And then also, just so we note in the council file, if we could on this, there'll be a vote, but it'll also be in the report that transportation said the letters would be mailed to all of the operators by next week. So if you want to put down by next week, I would say close of business by Friday next week, because we weren't clear in what he said, and he just said next week. So I'll give him the benefit of the doubt and say COB by next Friday. But those letters would be sent to all operators that don't have a approved pilot. Okay. Thank you very much. All right, with that, exciting conversation, colleagues. Let's go ahead and item 20, there was a request to continue that item, so we're going to go ahead and continue that to the next Public Safety Committee meeting. And we'll go ahead and take items 8, 10, and 9 together, if we could. Eight, 9, and 10. I like how I read it 8, 10, and 9. Okay, 8, 9, and 10. Well, they're written different ways. They were originally for consent.
Chair, you can say it however you want.
Okay. All right, then 9, 10, and 8.
Good morning.
Good morning, Julie.
Assistant City Attorney Julie Raffish. Before you are 3 ordinances. Each has been prepared at the request of the City Council and is consistent with the content of the board reports that were prepared by the Los Angeles Fire Department. And we are here to answer any questions for you.
Colleagues, do you have any questions on these? Okay, I just had a couple questions. I understand some of these fees are new to businesses, and some of the actual permits themselves are also perhaps new to businesses. If you can walk us through that.
Yes, my name is Scott Miller. I'm a captain with the Fire Prevention Bureau. Would you like to do them one at a time, or?
However, whichever way you're comfortable. Yeah.
The first ordinance, which I believe is listed as item number 8, is incorporating the new California Fire Code supplementals into the Los Angeles Fire Code. And in doing that, the California Fire Code supplementals recommended certain permits issued for certain processes that were included in those regulations. Several of those processes are actually new processes that haven't been in place and regulated before, specifically carbon dioxide enrichment systems is a process related to cannabis industry and their growing processes. And so it's something that the fire department hasn't regulated in the past and will be regulating in the future.
So these aren't on all businesses, these are on very specific industries.
These are going to affect very specific industries. The next one on the list would be flammable and combustible liquids vehicles. This is a new business model that's come to California in the last couple of years. It's called mobile fueling. It's kind of been referred to as fueling by Uber, where as opposed to you going to the gas station to fuel your car, the gas station comes to you. There's several business models with this, and it's actually been incorporated into a lot of business models for corporations, where as part of the corporate package, say for a Google or one of the other large corporations, if you're at a certain level within the corporation, you come in the parking lot, you check in on the app, you leave your fuel tank open, truck comes in and fuels up. And we want to make sure that these processes are done in a safe manner.
This is... All right, so let me, just quick question. Would this also allow, I can understand them for fleets, if you will, for large operators, have you suggested, that have designated and dedicated lots of multiple vehicles and don't have pump stations? Okay, can see that happening. Would this also open the door, when you said Uber-type operations, if you will, would this also open the door to mobile fueling, where you can have a vehicle come to your home or business as an individual from an app and fuel your vehicle?
When the state was going through that process, that was a large conversation within the fire community. And the next permit issued is on locations where the fire department will actually identify safe locations for fueling. So the company would be permitted to, we would permit their truck, and then they would have to have a permit for the location that they would use that truck at. So no, it would probably not allow them to come to somebody's residence and do it. There would have to be some sort of prearrangement. And we were concerned about truck pulls up at the Ralph's supermarket and parks and says, okay, I'm here, come to us. Yeah. Well, there's a lot of other things that need to go into place before we allow something like that to happen. So is
that currently what you're describing, an illegal activity?
That would be an illegal act.
So that's not something we have to focus on for new rules and regulations? No. Or unless Mr. Buscaino would like to have a pilot?
Yeah. Okay. Mr. Buscaino, what's your address? You can head over right now.
Okay.
The next permit issued in this group is plant extraction systems. This is the hazardous extraction process for cannabis, and they have processes that they put in place, and we have regulations.
So it sounds like most of the new permitting is very specific on very specific industries and targeted to newer type of industries, and therefore they are newer permits, not new permits for all businesses with new fees. Is that what I'm hearing?
From this ordinance, that's absolutely correct.
Okay, so we can check that one. The next one.
The next one is requested inspection. And this is a service that the fire department got drawn into, and basically we're looking for cost recovery on the services that we provide. Requested inspection, this is a situation where a business, generally it's a doctor's office or a medical clinic, is required to have a fire clearance letter from the fire department saying that they're code compliant. What that entails is somebody making a trip out there, doing the inspection, and then providing them with the compliance letter. At the present time, we have been doing this for the last several years with no cost to the industry, but definitely a cost to the city. So the second ordinance would allow the city cost recovery on that.
And how much are those
We're looking
inspection
at
costs?
that being charged at 1 hour.
And 1 hour's cost of,
I believe that it was $217 on the last cost special services report.
$200 for them to come out for an hour and do a permit check.
Mr. Chair, does this also encompass nonprofit clinics?
It would encompass anybody that requested us to come out and provide the service. We did not put in any provision for profit versus nonprofit, which we don't differentiate between on any of our other programs.
Right. When it comes to fire safety, it's universal. But what do you mean upon request? Is it not required?
It's not a city requirement. This is generally it's a payment or insurance requirement. We've all seen the old 2020 news reports about the clinics that had deplorable conditions in them.
Yeah.
So the people making payments to those clinics are looking at ways to make sure their clinics are safe, and this is one of the tools that they've implemented.
So an insurance company will require a sign-off.
Correct.
From an inspection.
And so what they're doing is good from the safety side, and from the fire side, it's a good thing, but at the same time, it does cost the city to do that, and we're looking.
Don't we do that at the time they get their certificate of occupancy as well?
Well, certificate of occupancy is clearing the building itself for the use. This is a maintenance issue for them as an ongoing clinic.
So we're not changing the fees on the occupancy permitting?
No.
We're just adding this to the requested, okay.
Lastly, is it a yearly?
Okay.
It's whatever the regulating agency that wants to see this fire clearance letter request. From my experience, no, it's not an annual thing. They're very inconsistent.
Schools, preschools, daycare, no?
No schools, preschools. It's not getting into that.
Health facilities.
It's going to be medical office clinic.
Medical, okay.
Thank you.
It's not a quick question. I think this is very important, and it's $217 an hour, right?
That's the cost that we calculate our.
Do you have enough staff to effectively carry out all these inspections?
Yeah. At this time, yes.
Okay. Okay.
And the third ordinance, addresses some other new technologies that have come in the last couple of years. One of them being the radio responder coverage and the permits that are involved with that. And what this entails is we found that as buildings are built, our radios no longer work in the buildings. So they have to put in an internal radio system in those buildings to make our emergency services radios work in the building. This allows us to recover the cost of the plan check for those systems.
Oh, got it. And this is only new buildings, or would the existing buildings we have to update?
If an existing building is required to update, it would apply to them. But we have not been going out and effectively going out and retroactively saying, okay, you need to update your radio systems. But if a building were to determine that they were going to update their system or install one of these systems, it definitely would apply.
So on that, just question, is that something we should look at? Are there a number of buildings in Los Angeles that don't have or might have some issues?
There are buildings that could have some issues, and it's something the fire department is definitely monitoring. We aren't to the point yet that we're ready to go out there and enact on that. We do have the code authority in our current Los Angeles Fire Code to retroactively require a building to upgrade, but we have not been actively going out and testing every building and saying, okay, where are you at, where are you at, where are you at? With all the building in downtown Los Angeles, it is going to become more and more of a problem because a building built in 1967 may have been completely great with our radios, But as it was encapsulated by high-rise buildings around it, it may become a dead zone at some point in time.
This is something we should study. So if you could report back to me on some of those issues, and maybe that's something we could do a deeper dive in and looking at what we can do working with BOMA and some of the other stakeholders to figure out how we can update that technology. Okay, I think that's the final one. Is that correct?
There's another permit in here for high-piled storage. This is the one that probably affects the most businesses throughout the city. And again, it's something that we have been doing all along without charging for. But high-piled, high-rack storage is where you have warehouses with rack storage over 12 feet tall and over a minimum number of square feet. They have to meet a whole litany of additional regulations. And this just establishes the permit for us to plan check those when they install the systems, as well as track them once they're installed to make sure they maintain their compliance.
So when we say track, so we would be going out there annually and charging a new fee?
This one entails first a plan check fee, and secondly would be an annual operating fee.
What's the annual operating fee cost?
It was 2 hours, so it would be $440, or yeah, $440.
This would be hundreds, if not thousands, of businesses, wouldn't it? Like furniture stores and home care centers and...
Probably, well, most of your retail stay below 12 feet unless you go into the big box stores.
Yeah, but light industrial manufacturing, a lot of Ms. Rodriguez's district, a lot of my district, a lot of the Valley,
prop houses.
Joe's district, prop houses.
In the industries.
Can we?
This needs a little more.
Can we hold that one back for just further discussion? I think we'll do a deeper dive into that one.
Okay.
Figure it out. And it sounds like it's critical, but I think it needs probably some more discussion. So that was item 10? Okay, so colleagues, if we could, we'll hear item 10 on the next Public Safety Committee meeting, and then we can meet between now and then and go ahead and approve the balance of the items. I believe it's 8 and 9. That's okay? Okay, without objection, then that'll be the order. I believe that clears the desk. That concludes the agenda. There's no more public comment, and we are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.